Gaming is in session. We're going to review Dyschronia, Chronos Alternate Chapter 1. So, esteemed court, PSVR2 is bringing in an era of next level immersion which provides obvious benefits and avenues of gameplay with enhanced interactions and new mechanics and the like. But what can this new generation of VR do for storytelling itself? Visual novels, once an underwhelming and technically unimpressive genre of games, now has the ability to capitalize on the benefits of this immersion to make their stories feel less like reading a book and more like experiencing a story. And today, our defendant, Dyschronia Chronos Alternate Chapter 1 False Awakening, is PSVR2's first crack at such an attempt. So, bringing to the stand our defendant, Dyschronia, I'm not going to read the whole title again. It's a $19.99 game on the PlayStation Store. We were provided a review copy from the publisher, so thank you very much for that. It's published by Perpetual Games, and I'm going to read all the developer out of here because it's kind of relevant. Developed by My Dearest Inc. and Izanagi Games Incorporated. These are people who made previous games in the PSVR 1. Blanking on the name, but I reviewed them for PSVR 1. They're like the only visual novel VR games out there. But it was also ported for the PSVR 2 by VR Monkey. Make a note of that. We're bringing the defendant to the table with 3 charges: 1 count of animania, 1 count of UI instability, and 1 count of going out on top. So, to discuss the first charge, we're going to discuss the count of animania. Dyschronia, like its predecessors from My Dearest on PSVR 1, succeeds in making you feel like you're living in an anime. The game puts you in the role of protagonist Hal Sion, that's first name, last name, a variant living in a doomed city wherein the inhabitants live asleep in a combined consciousness similar to a metaverse, if you will. Your job is a supervisor, and you go around this metaverse to bring order to the collective consciousness to prevent emotional instability from bleeding into the collective and ruining this neural network. To do that, you must solve a murder that occurs at the beginning of the game by using time travel, memory diving, and a bit of Groundhog Day magic to acquire the evidence. There's even a bit of what seems like cloning and android human replacements going on to round out this meal of sci-fi anime tropes. But somehow it pulls it off mostly well if you don't dwell on the specifics. Other things that bring you into this anime world is the game has nearly full voice acting in both English and Japanese, and both are done mostly very well. I want to give special props to the main character English voice actor. Didn't catch his name, it was in the credits, so I apologize there. But it's one of the best English voice actings I've heard in this style of game. Usually it's corny. This one's not corny. And I alternated between Japanese and English. The English one was better for technical reasons, but the English voice actor was very convincing, and I enjoyed hearing him throughout the majority of the game. The presentation clearly feels like you're in an anime with the city pop music in the background and the flashy character designs. The title cinematic itself feels like it was pulled straight from a Persona game, which is good, but it's also probably the closest I've ever come to vomiting in VR with its quick cuts and its way too in-your-face scaling that caused me to struggle to maintain focus amongst the onslaught of colors and flashy character intros. But once that subsides, it calms down into a pace to be expected for a visual novel style game, fortunately. However, it also suffers from, expectedly, anime style writing. So if you're a fan of anime, you expect this. If you're not a fan of anime, it's probably stuff that's going to push you away. It's got dialogue that feels repetitive or over-explained at times, and the characters follow mostly along with anime archetypes, which can be a mixed bag. So you have like an annoyingly cute sidekick, which some people love. I hate that crap. But you have the charmingly lackadaisical best friend who, is loyal, but he just isn't really reliable. But it's not quite as abrasive as that kind of stuff that you see in a lot of anime or anime-based video games. So I can take the good and I can kind of leave the bad. But overall, if you're willing to overlook some logical inconsistencies in character behavior and some drawn out, overwrought conversations, there's enough style and sizzle to pull you through a decent story. Because of that, I find Dyschronia on the charge of 1 count of animania guilty. Adam, have any questions?
One of the things I love the games that go out and do something different. So I'm glad that anime is a style of a game for right here, one of the launch titles of PSVR 2. I don't really have a cross examination, but I'm glad to hear they certainly ported this. It's on the PSVR 2 library, and it's something different that none of the other games are bringing to the market right now. I like that, but I want to hear more. So let's continue.
Yeah. On the second charge, we have UI instability. So for the second charge, I'm going to simply list the issues that popped up in the game that turned a relaxing story-based experience into something that was more frustrating and aggravating. The biggest thing, subtitles regularly get lost behind characters and environments more often than not. So when you're exploring an environment, somebody's saying something to you, that wall of text, the text that you're supposed to be reading, is behind the character that's talking to you, or behind the object it's describing, sometimes behind like a computer monitor, so you have no idea what they're saying. This wouldn't be an issue if every single element was voice acted, but it's mostly voice acted. There's some times where they just go, and a piece of text is supposed to pop up. So I see an item here, can't read what they're saying about it, so I have to turn my head away so that the subtitles move in a direction where I can finally see it. Now, if this is a big environment, then I'm not going to be able to read that stuff. That was awful. The pause button is non-existent. So if you want to change options around, change your locomotion, you have to either go into pass-through mode or leave your tracking area so that it causes an error, and then you come back and there's a pause menu, or you have to hit the screenshot button and then take a screenshot or go into that screenshot management space and then come back, and then you can adjust options and stuff like that. I tried a million other ways. That's the only way I can reliably make that happen. That's awful UI. Many menus and screens are way too close. So you hit a button to pull up your inventory, it's right in your face, and it's uncomfortable to like reach up between me and the screen to grab that object that I'm trying to grab. And a lot of times these menus would pop up and my hand would be at rest at my side. And because of where my hand is, based with where the VR buttons are, I would accidentally close the menu or confirm some piece of information, and I would entirely miss what was told to me, and I'd be totally lost in the menu and wouldn't know what was going on, which is a huge no-no for a VR visual novel game. And lastly, it was confusing at times when I was supposed to start moving around. There's cutscenes in the game, but it will like have your character blink and you're in an environment and then blink again, and now you can walk around. Sometimes it wouldn't blink again, so I didn't know if I was allowed to walk around or if I'm waiting for a character to slowly mosey their way into my view. But that largely feels like a poorly optimized port in terms of load times. It's a PS5. You can probably load everything up at once and just let it go through it. But it's not all bad. The counseling mode or counseling game is simple. This is where you're going through this environment and you are, interacting with NPCs, and you're playing basically a Simon Says game to get them over the emotional turmoil they're having. It's a nice diversion. But overall, as you're moving around the environment, there's a hybrid mode that you have for movement that you can use that I recommend as you're navigating the space. It has free movement, but also teleportation mixed in, so you can use that. The object interactions as you're solving puzzles and stuff are decent enough, and the puzzles, when they appear, utilize VR well, where you're grabbing things, moving things around, building stuff. So that's pretty good. There's a transition, as I mentioned, it's like a Matrix type thing, metaverse. You can transition between this, I think it's called an active dream, and reality but at the click of a button. Mostly seamless, pretty cool to see the world take on a new life form right before your eyes. And oddly enough, there was a stealth mechanic that was introduced at the very beginning of the game, never used at all in the entire game. Kind of confusing. I will say, and this goes into my third chart, the final segment, which is a trial after you've collected the evidence, is spectacular. The interactions in that game, the scene, you're presenting the evidence that you gathered, and the manner in which you do this, I don't want to spoil it, is peak VR entertainment. It was something you can only do in VR, and it just went off beautifully. And I really hope that Chapter 2 of this game has more of this, because it really made me pine for like a Danganronpa VR or Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney VR game. But it feels like a lot of these issues are the fault of the port rather than the game itself, but I am here to review the PSVR2 version, and for that I must find Dyschronia for the charge of UI instability. Guilty.
So you mentioned sometimes you can't read the subtitles. Is there not an option for all the voice actors just to speak in English?
You can do that, except there's little bits of information where they haven't voice acted. It's like a thought going on in your head. The character's not going to say it, but it'll have the text in front of you. Or some of these minor interactions where a character will just some of these dialogue heavy games, they'll VO the important parts, but then there's parts where there's like, oh, what about? And then it just has a whole paragraph for you to read or something. That stuff is impossible to read. Or if I pick up an object and there's a description for the object, sometimes that'll get lost behind the object, there's even cutscenes where it happens and you can't move your head. It's bewildering.
Oof. Okay. That hurts. On to our final third count.
Yeah, this one's going to be pretty short. The third count, Charge 3, going out on top. The game is about 6 hours long, and it starts to feel stale about 3 or 4 hours into it. You're kind of wondering when it's going to pick up, when things are going to start happening. But the last hour, it really finds its groove, and it ends on a cliffhanger of all things. So you do this last hour, and it's just like, oh, this is good. I'm ready. Let's play this game. And it suddenly, abruptly ends, invites you to get the Chapter 2 as a DLC. The cliffhanger hinges on me caring about a character that's impossible to care about because they're really just introduced right then and there. And as a result, if the second game is more like the first half of the first game and less like the second half where all the cool stuff happens, I'm not sure if I'm interested in a chapter 2. But for a $20 game, I certainly feel like it's an appropriate length. But I feel no compulsion to revisit it. And while I look forward to seeing how the story plays out, I have concerns about chapter 2 raising more questions rather than answering the litany of lingering ones that currently exist. But I can't help but say that in the end, I want more. And for that, I find Dyschronia, for the charge of going out on top, guilty.
So I'm curious. I have a lot of background on the game. I understand its strengths and weaknesses. Give me a quick, non spoiler plot synopsis because I don't really know what the general theme of the game is, which is going to drive me to purchase it or not.
You are a variant, which is like a mutant. You're this guy that lives in this city. And in this city, there's a real city and a virtual city that all the rest of the people in the city live in. You live inside this dome, and there's some calamity that happened outside that requires people to live in this dome, and you're trying to keep, the stability of the environment in here, of the virtual environment in here. A very important person to you, this professor, has been murdered right out of the gate, and this murder is held, or this professor is held in high regard by everybody in the city. Murder is not supposed to be possible in this city because of these emotional regulator people. So everybody in the city is getting really disturbed by the fact that there's this murder, and we're starting to see funny stuff happen around the city, and the world's going to crap outside of these walls. So you're trying to do everything you can to solve the murder, so you can make everybody feel more comfortable in the city, so that the whole emotional neural network doesn't break down and ruin the entire city. Does that make sense?
It does. I like it. Good synopsis. I think the final thing is we need the verdict.
Yeah. Final verdict. Dyschronia, for all its style and ambitions, is a game that shows promise in breaking new ground in the VR visual novel space, but it doesn't do enough to solidify my confidence resolutely going forward. As a result, the jury finds Dyschronia as a game worthy of your purchase. Hung! It's a hung jury again, Adam, and I hate to say it. I hate to say it. I feel like this game might be better on other consoles, just because, as I mentioned, I know the porting studio behind this. They don't have the best track record, and some of these issues seem like if somebody really put focus into making this a PSVR2 title and leverage the PSVR2 technology, you wouldn't have issues like I don't know if I'm supposed to move around. You wouldn't have issues like the subtitles getting lost behind environments. Everything looks clean and good. It's just if you're not a visual novel fan, you're not an anime fan, this game's not going to suddenly make you one, right? This isn't the Cowboy Bebop of animes. This is just another anime that you might enjoy that has some cool story stuff happening. Um, I'm excited about Chapter 2. I'm certainly going to play Chapter 2, but it's hard to recommend for people who aren't already kind of interested in this kind of thing.